And it's kind of, if you're not an anthropologist or, a scientist, you see these two terms and it's hard to differentiate the two. What is a hominid and what is a hominin? And the easiest way to describe it, and I'll explain here in a moment why there's a difference between the two terms. Prior to the 2000s, everything was described as a hominid. Scientists wanted to differentiate the difference between us and the animal kingdom, and so they came up with the term hominin. So when you see the term hominid with a D on the end, that includes your great apes, that includes your chimpanzees, your orangutans, that includes everything extinct and still living today, and also includes humans. So when you see the term hominid, think of anything human-like that has hands and has a humanesque about it, like a gorilla or anything. Everything gets blasted into that term hominid. When you see the term hominin with an N on the end, that has to do with us as humans. And whenever I see the term hominin and you see that N on the end, try to think about not in nature. We're not, as humans, we're not so much in nature. And whenever I see the term hominin, I always think not in nature, mankind, humans. And so I know the two terms are confusing. Prior to 2000, you'll see everything as being called a hominid, including us, which is true. It's just a real broad term to describe anything human-like. But when you see hominin, that is directly related to human beings, mankind, things close to our family tree. So I hope that clarifies it. I did a blog post on the 27th, breaking down the two terms, and I hope that kind of alleviates some of the confusion. Brian S., thanks for sending me the question. I really appreciate it. I want to thank James L. for sending me the article. Did you guys see this? I posted it on the blog today, on the 28th. It's a new species of ancient man found. And these researchers were out in Ethiopia, and they came across these 4 jawbones. And as you notice, if you read the article, again, we're talking about a new species of ancient human found. So they refer to the jawbones and what these things were as hominins. And the jawbones date back, they say 3.5 million years ago. And they're calling them early human species. And it's interesting, if you take a look at the jawbones, they do look very human-like. There's even a recreation of what this ancient man actually looked like in the article. But it's a very, very interesting article. I appreciate the comments. I know Dave T. actually had a great point in one of the comments. He says, just proves that the point that there's multiple species of hominins existing at the same time in the past. When they were pulling up these bones, they theorized that these different species of hominins were actually walking the earth at the same time. And so Dave T. actually brings up a really good point. One of the things that he brought up that I agree with is, Bigfoot, they might be hominids. I think they're more of hominids than hominins, but I could be wrong. The point I like that he made was, it's amazing that these scientists are so eager to prove this new species from the past, but not one of them is willing to look in their own backyard of living species today, that being Bigfoot. They refuse to look at it. And he does. He brings up a really good point. When they find these jawbones, or find any piece of ancient man, they're really quick to label it, jump on it, give it some sort of content when they're presenting it. And, it goes back to the situation we're in today. I mean, it sounds gruesome, but we really do need a piece of one of these creatures, put it into a category, and have science recognize it today. But Dave T., great point. I know Tyler D. wants me to look into Everything You Know Is Wrong by Lloyd Pye. And I actually have, Tyler. I've looked into Lloyd Pye. I'm actually a huge fan of Lloyd Pye. I love his work. There's some things that I disagree with, just personal opinions. I'm sure that's irrelevant, but there's a few things I disagree with him on, but I love his work. I'm a huge fan of Lloyd Pye, and I wish I could have gotten him, actually spoken to him prior to him passing away. So it's kind of a shame that he passed away, but I do love his work, and I do go back and I watch those YouTube videos that he had posted. On Sunday, I'm going to be having Randy Harrington on, and Randy has probably one of the craziest encounters I've ever heard, one of the most fascinating encounters that I've ever heard. And to give you guys kind of a cliff notes, for those of you who don't know his encounter, he had one actually come up on the back of his truck. He had set up a campsite, and he was actually sleeping in his truck. And when you hear the story, you'll understand why it makes more sense and why it would come up to the truck. But if you have questions for Randy that you want me to ask him, under the post, under the podcast, Sunday show, Close Encounter, what questions do you have? Post your questions in there, and I will ask Randy your questions. Randy's been researching this for a long time. He actually has a lot of great theories on why Sasquatch do what they do, and a lot of it's based on common sense. And him and I talked the other night for a couple hours, and he really is very, very passionate about this topic, and I just love that he studied the behavior, and he's able to give some insight on the behavior. Him and I talked about a couple things, and I thought, oh, you know what, that actually makes sense, what you're talking about with their behavior. I don't know that I've ever heard that before. But if you get a chance, post your question there. I will ask it on the air, and I will give you a shout-out with the question. So I'm really looking forward to Sunday. I hope you are too. There's a new show coming on. I posted it to the blog. Well, I don't want to say it's a new show coming on. They've done a trailer for Cold Case Cryptids, and it seems like an interesting show. I hope a network picks it up. It looks like a fascinating show. Here's a clip from the show.
Are encounters between humans and monsters buried in old newspaper archives around the country. Our team has uncovered hundreds of historic tales describing encounters with mysterious biological creatures. Could our ancestors have known more about strange creatures than we have been led to believe? Join Cold Case Cryptid investigators Rob, Melissa, Max, and Jeff as they travel back in time to find the truth about these unsolved monster mysteries.
Today, we are in Meadville, Mississippi, investigating an article from 1868 where former slaves described an 8-foot-tall hairy creature lurking in the nearby woods.
Hey guys, take a look at this. I just found an article. Describes an incident in a little rural town of Meadville, Mississippi. And look at that date. 1868. Huh. It's quite an interesting story. Someone makes a rather fantastic claim of encountering a upright, 8-foot-tall, hair-covered figure with eyes as big as hen's eggs. This looks pretty interesting. I think we should go down there and dig into this one a little bit.
Yeah.
Well, let's see what we can find.
Let's do it.
Tonight's going to be an interesting night. I'm talking with Sydney tonight. Sydney's from West Virginia, and she actually lives in an A-frame home that backs up to a hill. And she started having some encounters happen around the property that she couldn't explain. She lives out in the country, and she went and talked to some of her neighbors and some family that lives close by. And then everything started making sense. As soon as they started comparing notes, some of the neighbors had seen the creature. Some of the neighbors had shot at the creature. So Sydney, I want to welcome you to the show, and I really want to thank you for being here tonight.
It's my pleasure, Wes.
And if you would, go ahead and start off with, there's been so many things that have happened out on the property, but if you would, go ahead and talk about the first time you started noticing something wasn't right.
A number of years ago, I would say it's been at least 10. I was trying to think this morning how long it had actually been. But I think probably at least 10 years ago, I was living here alone, and I was in bed, and it was like around 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, and not daylight yet. And at that time, I did not leave the outside lights on. After this incident, I began leaving my outside lights on. But anyway, I was in bed, and the way my bed's positioned under a window in my bedroom, basically 5-6 feet from the outside wall. And what woke me up was something climbing on the wall onto the roof. I could actually hear I have a metal roof, and I live in a house that has a two-story extension out into the forest area. But there is a cement platform that is the top of a cellar that sits next to that outside wall. So I'm thinking, what is this? Something is climbing up from that area. I could hear under its belly, I could hear the metal of my metal roof. Then I hear it actually stand up, and by this time I'm all confused because at first I thought, was it a big cat of some sort? But then the thing begins to walk, and it takes these huge steps like a large man. And my mind is going like crazy because for a man to get on top of my roof, he would have to have a ladder, first of all. There was no indication there was a ladder. The thing walks. By this time, I'm looking up at the ceiling with the bed covers up just under my eyes, and I hear these huge footsteps walk down the roof. And then just momentarily, the footsteps come back, and I'm thinking, okay, it's going to jump off onto that cement pad, whatever it is, and leave. But that didn't happen. It comes directly over the end of the house, over my bedroom window, and you could tell that it launched itself off, which was the higher place to jump off, maybe 20 plus feet. It jumps off there, and it pushed itself off the roof. I could tell that because my bedroom window went to vibrating so hard that I actually thought the bedroom window was going to break and fall in on me. And my mind's going crazy. I'm thinking, oh, no, this is not a man. This couldn't be a man. A man wouldn't jump 20 feet. I mean, he would end up dead or broken bones at the very least. In pitch dark, no. What was that? What walked like a man on my roof? So the next day, I started doing some research. First, I went down to my mom's house after daylight and told them my brother was there, and I told him what had happened, and I demonstrated to them how this thing had walked, and I referred to it as a big man because I didn't know any different. I didn't know what it was. I knew it wasn't a man, but the way it walked like a man. So I came home and I researched on the computer for a good while, and I ran into an account about a Bigfoot walking on a person's roof and actually had damaged the roof. And thankfully, that didn't happen in my case. The metal roof, the way the house is built with structural beams and all that, I guess that didn't happen, thankfully. But then that got me on the quest of reading about Bigfoot. I didn't know anything about Bigfoot other than I remembered as a adolescent, possibly teen, about the Patterson-Gimlin thing, and Pacific Northwest, Sasquatch, Bigfoot. There was a probability because I don't know what all the animals are in the woods, and I know that there are different animals in different locations, so I thought, well, that's in the realm of possibility, but it didn't affect my world. I didn't think there was any such thing like that here. So the more I read, the more knowledgeable I became about the subject, the more I began putting things together that was happening in the neighborhood, as well as recalling things that happened like on my grandparents' farm and stories I'd heard over the years. And after hearing a lot of different things, then I came to the realization that I think we have a family of Bigfoot in this neighborhood. So I began talking to my brother about that, got him interested in the subject, and we both started listening and hearing, various sounds and all that. So that's what got me on the subject of Bigfoot. Now I read everything or listen to everything I can find out about it. I believe a lot of it, but like what your show, I think you're all spot on. I don't think these are peaceful, loving creatures that won't harm us humans. And actually, they scare me to death. I've never seen one. Hope I don't. I pray that I don't.
Yeah, and it's interesting. The home that you actually live in, you were living alone at the time, and it's an A-frame home, and the part where it jumped off was at the tallest peak. Is that correct?
That's correct. Mm-hmm.
And pretty quick, I used to live out in the country, and we'd have different animals get up on the roof. Mainly it was the next-door neighbor's livestock, roosters and whatnot would get up there. But it's interesting when you hear the step, obviously a man walking on the roof, that'd be enough to creep you out. Now
and the space between the steps was just unreal. I was thinking, I demonstrated to my brother the next day as far as my legs would stretch, and then it surely was more than that. It wasn't a man. I'm convinced of that. And then, as I said, a lot of other things had happened prior to that and have happened since then that makes me think, these creatures are here.
Well, and let's talk about some of that. So you've had everything happen from wood knocking, you've heard to animals being killed, to even finding footprints. And I know a lot of the neighbors even talk about, there's an incident with one of your neighbors. But before you actually get into that, talk about some of the things that just kind of happen around the property.
Well, ever since the incident on the roof, every winter when we have winter snows, like I said, I get isolated up here on this road. I have a dead-end driveway up a hill, and a lot of times I'll spend 2 or 3 weeks isolated, totally isolated. The only way anybody could come in here is by walking. So I'm always looking at the snow in the wintertime when we have a substantial amount of snow. I'm always interested to see, what kind of animal tracks are out there. I've observed deer, rabbit tracks, things like that. But it was only this late spring with one of our last large snowfalls that I actually saw what appeared to be footprints in the snow. I went out and took pictures. I measured them. I didn't get to measure them and take the pictures as soon as I would like to have. And when I did, they were like 6 feet apart from heel to the heel of the next one that I could see in the snow. And that was a first. I have also some pictures taken from my brother's garden where this was summertime. I believe it was June, around 3 or 4, well, it would have been more than 3 years, 4 years ago, I think. I totally appreciate where you and your brother say you can't remember exact details of things that happen. Well, that, to me, unless you keep a journal, which I did, I have tried to keep a journal on 2 or 3 occasions, but I find that I get sidetracked and don't do it. But unless you keep a daily journal, incidents that happen, you don't, the specifics of that situation or that happening, kind of, you just don't pay attention. So when I'm referring to times that I've seen or heard things, a lot of times it's generalized as being summer, spring, fall, whatever. I know that this was summertime because my brother was actually working in his garden. As I came by, he yelled at me, "There's footprints in the garden. Come and see them," which I did. I took pictures of those. And actually, we have most of the people in the neighborhood have their trash bins sitting at the end of this garden spot. So I'm just guessing. Most of what I put together is just by observation. I think maybe occasionally they frequent the garbage bins to look for trash, maybe food scraps or whatever. But these footprints came off the hill down in the garden, and they went back the same way that they had came. I've also had other relatives that saw footprints in the head of the hollow there where we live. We refer to these places that are kind of flat in the middle, then you have hillsides on each side as hollows in West Virginia. My hollow has the winding creek on 2 sides. It has hillsides. They're very densely populated. We only have about 10 homes in this hollow, and one of them is not even occupied. So they have plenty. These creatures would have plenty of game. We have deer, we have squirrel, we have rabbit, other small game. They have water sources. There's ponds further back on the hillsides. And when I refer to my place being isolated that people would have to walk in, there's hillsides at the back of my home, and you go for a long ways before you run into a road, and that road is densely populated also. So it's not a question of somebody walking here making those footprints in the snow. My brother had actually called me the day before I saw the footprints and said, "Hey, is there anything around your house and all that?" And I said, "No, I don't see anything other than, the small game and all that." He said, "Well, I went outside to feed my chickens, and he said, there's some kind of big tracks in my yard. He didn't have a camera, so he didn't have a cell phone, so he wasn't able to take photographs of it. But he took his grandchildren out to see the footprints, and he said they came off the hill, and then they were in a straight line, and then they went back up the hill. And it was in the location of our neighbor's garbage bin. And that garbage bin has been a source of a lot of activity over the years, because I will hear banging on that garbage bin. That's usually, the dogs will usually carry on like crazy in our neighborhood. Sometimes the banging on the trash can, it's not a can, it's actually a metal lid on a bin that's been homemade, and the neighbors put their trash in there. And that, I think that they come to that bin also, but my brother says he thinks they lift the lid up. He says, which is very hard for him to lift up. And he said he thinks they actually pick the lid up and just bang it down 2 or 3 times, da-da-da-da-da, like a drum roll almost. It's pretty rapid the way they beat on it, boom, 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 boom. And usually when that happens, the dogs shut up. They shut up. That's standard procedure with that. I hear that quite a lot in the fall and winter. Not as much in the summer. I've not heard it in a couple months now. Of course, now that it's summer, I have my air conditioning going and ceiling fans and things like that drown out some of the sound. In the wintertime, it's very quiet, and it seems the sound carries up to my location, and I hear quite a bit of things. The family group that I hear, the sounds they make, I call the one that always usually starts it as a big male. I call him the big guy. And I refer to what he does as owling, because he sounds like an owl on steroids, really. But they each have their individual call. Usually the next one that I hear most often that responds to the owling he sounds like a crow. It's almost like a flock of crows the way he does it so fast. And then the other 3, they kind of chime in, but it's not as distinctive to me what the sound are. I can't individually pick out their sound. The last time I heard that, actually, it was in the afternoon, and I was actually surprised because I was sitting on my brother's porch with his wife, and we all 3 heard that on the hill above where my uncle lives. And we were surprised because that's normally activity that I only hear in the late evening after dark or in the early morning hours. So I was really surprised it was mid-afternoon and I heard that.
Yeah, it's interesting when you hear that. For people who haven't heard that, I heard that for the first time out in Texas. And you hear owls all the time out there. I mean, it's weird because in Washington, you don't hear the owls as much as you do down south for whatever reason, or I haven't heard them that much up here. And then you go down there and you hear a lot of owls, but then every once in a while you'll hear an owl, and it sounds like an 800-pound owl. And it's not quite an owl, it's close, but it's a little bit off from the normal owls. But down there in Texas, they'd break off into like primate-type sounds after they do the owl calls. And I want to get to your neighbor shooting at one, but your brother actually had one banging on his house, didn't he? Pounding on his house?
Well, I actually have 3 brothers, and they all have said they have seen these creatures at nighttime or had experiences themselves when they lived here. I have 2 brothers that still live in the same hollow that I live in. One is no longer living here, but they have each had their experiences. Well, my baby brother, and he's the one that doesn't live here any longer. We're talking close to 30 years ago. He had 3 small boys who slept in one end of the house trailer, and he and his wife slept in the other end of the house trailer. And their back door lock was broken, and so it just closed. They felt no fear because they were in the head of this hollow. It dead ends up there. The neighbors were his brothers, my other 2 brothers. They had houses up there, and that was it. But one night, the wife awakened from her sleep, and she said there was a large, very large man in the hallway. And when I asked her, well, what was the man doing, she said he was slightly weaving from side to side when she came awake and saw him. Well, she began to scream that there is a large man in the hallway. You know, she went to screaming. Well, by the time he got to his senses and got out of bed, it was gone, and the back door was wide open. So needless to say, they were quite frightened. He got his lock fixed after that, but they thought it had been an intruder because they actually called the police and then notified us, be on the lookout. Somebody had been in their house, the prowler, the policeman said, we don't know who it was. Well, now that I know the behavior, having read and listened to programming, that is characteristic of a large ape-like creature to weave side to side. And it makes me wonder now, was that what was in their, in their house?
Yeah, definitely makes you wonder. A prowler, if you'd have made eye contact, there'd have been kind of an oh crap moment, and then the prowler probably would have taken off, ran.
Right.
He wouldn't have stood there going side to side like an ape. You know what I mean?
My granddaughter actually had an experience. They did live in a house just below my hill. And her father had put a wood floor in their house, in her room, and had installed it himself. And her room was all taken apart, so she was sleeping on the mattress on the floor that night. And the window shade was down and all that, like I said, where they'd been painting and doing work in the room. And she had to go to the restroom. She got up, went to the bathroom, and as she came back, she said there was a large man went running past her window, scared her to death. Ran into the downspout on the house and left, and she thought it was a large man prowling around the house. Well, I had my own ideas about that, too. That happened a couple of years ago. I asked my son, did he ever hear anything, the same son that owns that place, and he said one morning he came out to go to work. He said somebody whistled at him from across the creek up on the hillside, a very sharp. He said it was not a bird, and he thought that was kind of odd. When he was a teenager, he used to ride motorcycles around in the neighborhood and up in the hillside. He actually told me, Mom, if you knew where I had that motorcycle, you'd probably kill me. But he said one time I said, well, did you ever hear anything when you were out riding? And he said, well, one time, he said, I was back on the ridge back here, and he said that he heard a huge growl over top of the motorcycle engine. He said he didn't know what it was, didn't know if it was a bear. He didn't stick around long enough to find out, but he remembered it very well. I've actually heard a roar like a werewolf sound. My brother was with me when we heard that, and it was a repetitive vocalization twice. And to me, it sounded like, I always said it was a combination of the roar of a lion with the resonance of a bull down at a drum. It was a real deep sounding roar, and then it ended with a guttural growl at the end of it. And like I said, it did that twice, and we'd been sitting on the porch. The dogs had been carrying on like crazy. When that thing roared like that, the dogs shut up like little mice, and my brother, he left, and I came in and locked my door. So that's the only time I've ever heard that. Although one of my cousins who lives across the creek on up in the hollow a little further from me, she said that she herself had heard that one night. She said it came down that hollow and was roaring like that and even beat on their house. And I've also heard the whooping, what I call the whooping sound. I've heard that on one occasion, and it repeated it twice, or one yelled and the other answered back. And actually, I had a friend with me at the time that happened, and surprisingly, that was at 9:30 in the morning. I've heard wood knockings too many times to count. That's a constant feature. I've heard rocks banging together. Actually, in the fall, I heard that and thought that I had the impression that they were cracking walnuts or something, some type of nuts. That was just my impression. Your mind is always trying to think, well, what could this possibly be? I've had open hand slaps on my house 2 or 3 different times. One occasion, I've had my doorbell ring when I knew there was nobody there. There had been no traffic. Nobody came up this hill in their car. And actually, I was sitting talking to my brother when it was about 10:30 at night, and I heard the doorbell ring. And I said, the doorbell just rang. He said, get up and go see. I said, no way. And then it repeated it again, and then after that, I didn't hear that. One night, I was sitting downstairs watching TV. This happened a couple of falls ago, 2 or 3 years ago. And there was something walking in the gravel driveway. And I told my brother, we were talking on the phone, I called him and I said, I just heard something crazy out there in the driveway. I said, it was like a big man walking, but he wasn't trying to walk quietly. The intention that I heard was it was trying to make me aware that it heard, that I could hear it, because it was out there, it was scooting the gravel with each step. So I could hear the swoosh, swoosh, swoosh of the gravel as it walked either up or down the hill. I was too afraid to go look. I'm scared to death of these things. I hate wintertime because of the isolation and the fact that I'm here alone. And I figure most animals have it pretty rough in the wintertime. They probably have less to eat, even though, like I said, we do have a lot of deer and all that. But I just feel like it's a hard time for any kind of animal to survive, and I don't want to be anything's dinner.
Yeah, no, I don't blame you.
I really am. I'm honest with you. I am very, very afraid. And when you think that a creature like that's in your neighborhood, you've lost your peace of mind. Because when I work out in my yard or do anything, I'm always looking over my shoulder. My brother does the same thing. Up in the head of that hollow where I had relatives that said they saw a group of these things, he has livestock there, and he goes and feeds them every day. And he's always looking over his shoulder, he said. So,
didn't your mother...
And I wanted to tell you that I remembered when you said that what you and your brother saw and how that thing was down on all fours and the way it walked or the way it crawled. One of my nieces, her husband, who had saw this group of them one night over by the creek bank, he and his brother-in-law had taken their flashlight. They heard noises, and they were making some kind of vocalization. So they walked a little closer to the creek bank and shined their flashlight real quick. And they said there was one down on all fours near the creek. They said it moved in a way they had never thought an animal could move. They said it went backwards on all fours, just right up that hill backwards. They said almost like a spider. And there were a group of them on the hillside above that one when it went backwards. And they said it growled at them, showed its teeth when they shined the flashlight on it. So that always stuck in my mind. And then when I heard what you said, I thought, wow, it sounds very similar, really.
Yeah, when they're on all fours, it's pretty disturbing to watch how they move. Because just like your brother-in-law, I mean, I've never seen anything move like that ever. Your mom actually, when did your mom see something at the window? Was that prior to it walking on the roof, or was that after?
After. Well, I was living here alone when it walked on the roof. And my mother, she's 86 now. For 5 years she lived with me, and she's in a nursing home now, and she's been there almost 3 years. So she lived with me for 5 years, and it was during that 5 years, a period of time. So we're talking about 6 years ago when she saw this. She got up. She, being an older lady, she had to go to the potty at night. So she got up to go to the potty, and she had a habit of walking to the double doorway into my dining room, and I have a large picture window there, and so she would just kind of look out. I don't know what she was looking for, but that was her habit. And she said she walked to the doorway there, and right outside the picture window, she saw a big, hairy back. She did not see the top of the head. She did not see the head. She said, I said, well, Mom, what was it doing? And she said, well, it just seemed to be looking up toward the hollow, up the valley there, toward the hollow. I said, well, what did you do, Mom? She said, I backed up and got in bed as quietly and as quickly as I could, and I didn't get back out of bed again. And so she never did that again, she said. She never walked to that doorway at night. That cured her curiosity. She never wanted to go there and see anything again. So I didn't have window shades on that window at the time. But since then, I put window shades up because that really scared us both, really. We didn't want anything looking in the window, especially after I learned that they do like to look in your window. So when it gets dark here at my house, all my window shades are closed. It means wintertime, they get closed around 5 o'clock. In summertime, of course, I can wait a little longer. But no, I don't want the fright. I'm an older lady myself, and I think I'd pass out or die of a heart attack if I saw a face looking at me.
Yeah, I don't blame you. You know, it's interesting, your mother's description. I think as you and I talked the other day, I think it was either Bear or Kumbo, one of those guys. I apologize, I can't remember which one it is right offhand. Told me that they called them no-heads. I think it was Bear, actually. Told me that they called them no-heads down in Mississippi, and I thought, that's a weird name. Why do they call them no-heads? And he was telling me that from behind, people would see them walk off and see their backs, and it looked like they had no heads because the back was so big, and the way they the placement of the head was kind of forward and down, that from behind, they called them no-heads. They didn't call them Sasquatch, they didn't call them Bigfoot, they just called them no-heads. And that's where that term kind of stuck down there in Mississippi. One of your neighbors actually took a couple shots at one of them, and I meant to ask you the other day, do you know why he fired off a couple shots towards them?
Well, comment on the no-heads first, if you don't mind. As a little child, my grandmother constantly would tell us things that happened to her or people she knew. And one of the stories that we became acquainted with was in the 1930s and 1940s. The young people, for social gatherings, went to each other's house. We're talking a good distance from where I live now. We still own property in that vicinity, but not that particular property. But anyway, she said the young people walked in, they'd have to walk to each other's homes. They had miner's lights, sometimes no light at all except for the moonlight. One of the things that was seen quite often in the area that these people referred to as Piney Bottoms was headless men. And I thought that was really interesting, headless men. Well, and that had been seen many times by many people. One day I was looking at some Bigfoot information, and I saw this drawing, and I don't know who did it, so I'm sorry, but the drawing was of a Sasquatch, a Bigfoot, with the moon silhouetted behind it. And I looked at that and I thought, that very much looks like a headless person. If I saw that in the dark with just the moonlight, no other light source, yes, I would think that might be a man. And where the head kind of went up into the little cone-like area that you see, I would think that's a neck, and I'm expecting a head to be on top of that. So I even sent that picture to one of my aunts, and she also agreed with me that that did look like a headless man. So I'm pretty convinced now that, and also knowing that even today people in that area are saying they see Bigfoot. I'm convinced that the headless men of Piney Bottom that my grandmother told us about were these Bigfoot.
Yeah,
now, as to the neighbor, the gentleman has since passed away, and I can see his house from my house on the other knoll up the driveway up the hill, and I can see the house sitting there. And he passed away. He had cancer, but prior to his passing away, his son would come and check on him in the evenings. They had a dog there that they would feed. But this man had been robbed a couple of times, and so he was constantly worried about being robbed, and any noise or anything, he was always investigating it. So one night, he thought there was a prowler around again, so he goes out and he yells, "You better, let yourself be known. Who are you? What do you want?" And he got no response, so he started firing his gun, and apparently wounded or at least angered some type of animal that ran away. Later, his son came to believe this, but at the time when his dad told him, his dad had been telling him, "There's something big hanging around this house. Something big's coming around my house." And his son said, "I just thought my dad was suffering from some of the medication they were giving him for his cancer, that it kind of maybe he was delusional." Anyway, that night, the old man had gone to bed, and the next day when he got up, everything he had outside that wasn't nailed down, so to speak, his four-wheeler, his lawnmower, his weed eaters, and anything he had out there was pitched over the hill. So they had a time getting all that stuff back up to where he had it. And after the old man passed away is when the younger boy saw the creature. He actually saw the creature. He used to come and check on his dad's house, which he still does, and he would bring food scraps for a dog they had there. And he would get, at the bakery, he would get these loaves of bread, and he would come and he'd pitch it out to the dog. Later, he came to believe that probably this creature was coming down, and after he'd go in the house or he'd leave, and he'd help himself to that bread that he was throwing out. But he began to suspect something was going on, and one night he actually took the flashlight and went outside when he heard the dog making some noises, and so he thought, well, I'm going to see what that is, and took the flashlight out and shined it, and he said there was a big creature standing there on the bank of the hill, and he said it threw its arm up over its eyes, and it growled and showed its teeth, and then he said it turned and bolted around the hillside and up the hill. The next morning, he was afraid to get out any more to look for any signs of it, but he said, I'm a good tracker. I'm a good hunter. I'm a good tracker. He told my brother, he said, so the next morning, I tracked it. And he tracked it along the hillside, and he ended up in the hollow of where we live. There are caves and rock cliffs and various other things way up in that hollow. And actually, he told my brother that he came across a couple of things. He said, well, he got in this area. He said he had to get off his four-wheeler and actually hoof it on foot for quite a distance. And he said that he came into a place that to him looked like two large graves. He said it was the earth was over this place, and he said, I got the most eerie feeling there. He said it's like my skin crawled. And he said he didn't stick around very long to do any investigation or anything, but the tracks had led him to that area. And he told my brother, he said these were large human-like footprints, but they were not human. He said that he had seen prints when he's been deer hunting in October, November time frame. He had seen footprints on more than one occasion when he's been out hunting. Also, my nephew will come in this hollow just to hunt. His father still owns property here, and so he will hunt on his father's property and on our property. We don't mind. He has tree stands. He told me that on 3 or 4 occasions, the tree stands that he has up, he'll find them pitched over the hill. They'll be torn off the tree and pitched over the hill. And he said, actually, sometimes they're pitched to a good distance from the tree that he had them in. He's put up trail cams before because he suspects Bigfoot too. He's not seen one, but he's always on the lookout. But he said that the trail cams have been ripped off and thrown away too, and crushed up, different things like that. So
it's interesting that you say that. I just talked to, well, I'll leave his name out for the broadcast, but I just talked to another pretty well-known researcher, and he was saying the same thing. He said his trail cams, he had actually one trail cam that had been broken in half, and he's like, I'm not sure what, he knew what it was, but he goes, man, the thing was like bent in half. And then he had his tree stand actually ripped down and thrown like off a cliff, and he's like, man, I had that thing chained up with a lock on it, and he's like, I don't know, he's like, man, it would have taken several men to get that thing down and actually break that lock. He goes, the tree stand was pretty high up, and something had actually snapped the chain, brought the tree stand down, and then threw it over a cliff. So interesting behavior. When do you notice the most activity out there?
Well, like I said, because of the fact that I do have the air conditioning and fans going, I also, well, I'll get back to the time. The time that I actually hear more things is fall and winter, but I do know they're here because of the wood knocking and other things I hear and vocalizations and things. They're here all year. I know some people say that they migrate or what. I don't believe that. And that's only based on my armchair quarterbacking here. I'm not a hunter. I'm not an outdoorsy type of person. I'm not outdoors. I've just, for some reason or other, the location of my house and observation, I hear these things, and I've tried to piece together the stories because of the things I hear. But in my estimation, they're not in this hollow every day. No. What I observe, the pattern, especially that, like I said, I observe in the wintertime, is that they will hunt in this area maybe 3, 4, 5 days, but then they will leave, and I say, oh boy, somebody else has been bothered with them now, and that they always come back. They seem to make a circuit of some sort in their hunting, and I think it's hunting that they're doing. They follow the game. If the deer move around, I think they move around. That's been my observation. I've had wood knocking very, very close on 2 or 3 different occasions, right, practically out just a little ways from my yard, up on the hillside, and I heard an animal being slaughtered. You could tell that it it was just seconds long that it yelled, but I think they work in teams. From my observation, because the first thing I heard was the tree knocking, then I hear an answer way up in the hollow, and then just a few minutes after that's when I heard that animal being killed. So I don't know what role the wood knocking plays. I don't know if that's the signal for one below. I kind of wondered if they actually knocked on the tree to say, here, I'm at this point right here. And the other one knocks, okay, I'm going to start driving something towards you. That's the impression I've got from what I've heard on several occasions. To me, it's like, okay, I'm going to herd this to you. And then my mental image, especially knowing that the animal was killed right close to where the wood knocking originated from, it seems to me like then he maybe springs out and actually kills the animal. And then, of course, I think they both enjoy the kill. And they, from my observation here in my hollow, they seem to take game or food all the way up in the head of that hollow somewhere. Because they will, if they're hunting anywhere close to these houses, and by their calls and all that I detect, it seems the last of the calls that I will hear originate from up in that hollow. And I have the impression that they actually take their kill in that hollow. And actually that hollow is where this gentleman that I was talking to you about earlier, one that his father shot at the creature, he said that he found bones and various things like that. Also, there was a small cave in another location in this area that he found carcasses of deers. He said stacked together, kind of, just bones and all that. He also found a stack of dogs. He told my brother there were 5 or 6 dogs stacked on top of each other back on this ridge.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting. It's kind of like on Sunday, I did the show of Joshua LaFleur and the battle that they had back in the 1850s. The way it's described, especially when you talk to the local natives, is they stack the bodies up, kind of like how, and I've heard that before from other witnesses, of stacking deer up or stacking dogs up, and kind of like a neat little stack that they feed on, or as they feed. I wanted to ask you, it's interesting, the wood knocking. I had a show I did a while back about the Siege of Hanabi, and I talked to Mike Humphreys, and he said when you hear the wood knocking, generally you'll hear an animal being killed right after that. And he said what they do is basically one, just like you said, Sydney, one will do a wood knocking, one will respond, then they'll drive the prey down to an ambush of where they're at. And it's not far off from what hunters do. Hunters do the same thing. One hunter will usually stand at the top of a game trail, kind of gently drive the prey down the game trail, and then the one at the end gets a shot. That's really, really fascinating that you've caught on to that. You hear the wood knocking, and then you hear the animals being killed.
Well, you see, I didn't even know that about hunters, because like I said, I'm not a hunter. I have relatives that hunt, but that's not in my realm of activity. So that's interesting to me to hear you say that. Other things that I've had happen here, like I had a lady that came and helped my mother work, like home care. And one morning she left, and I thought she was gone. She was the same lady that heard the whooping sound that I'd heard that morning around 9:30 in the morning. She left, and I thought she was gone. She came back, she knocked on the door, and when she came in, I said, "Did you forget something?" She said, "Look what was just thrown at me." And I said, "What is that?" I didn't even know what it was. I had a guess that I hadn't recalled ever seeing persimmons, and I do not have any persimmon trees around here. But I looked at it, so I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "Well, I stepped off the sidewalk into the gravel driveway there to get my car," and she said, "This came whizzing at me from up on the hillside there." And I said, it really did. And she used to laugh at me and make fun of me when she first came here to work for my mother. But she heard the whooping. She had that persimmon thrown at her. She's heard wood knocking while she worked here, because one morning she pulled in the driveway, and I was out of my car, and I said, "Come here. You want to hear wood knocking? Listen." And so she stopped talking. I said, "Just be quiet and listen." So she herself had heard wood knocking here. She had actually even left my house one day after her shift of work and came back and told me. She said, "When I stepped outside there," she had gone to the back door at that time, she said, "When I stepped out back here," she said, "I started hearing wood knocking up here on the hill." So she actually began to wonder what was all this stuff. And I would tell her, I said, "Well, people report that they do throw objects." I myself had experienced some type of nut, like a walnut or something, being thrown at me from off the same hillside here. I have heard tree crashing. I had some gentlemen here working on the house, and it started to rain just lightly, just a misty light rain. We were out there just talking while they worked. All of a sudden, up on that hill there behind my house, a big tree fell down. Of course, I realized, things happen in nature. That could happen. But my brother, when he knew I was going to talk to you, said, "Be sure to tell Wes about all the trees on my property at the head of that hollow." He said, "Big oak trees." He said, "You couldn't hardly push an oak tree down." He said, "I've got so many trees down on my property up there that have just been pushed over." And sometimes when he goes up there to feed, he will actually hear trees being pushed over or branches being broken. He and his wife both have heard, they said it sounded almost like fighting. They said it was like a group of animals fighting. This was just around dark in the summertime. They were sitting on their back porch. He called me when this happened, told me to go upstairs and open my window and listen, but I didn't hear it. It was over with. It was just so many seconds long, and he said his wife actually thought it was a siren from what she had heard. And he said, "That's not a siren." He was telling her, "No, that's not a siren." And they both agreed that it sounded like animals were fighting. But around my house, I've had things be moved. I have a big potted fern that I can't lift, that I get one of my children to lift when they come here. That's been moved before from where I had it sitting. I've had lawn furniture moved, but the distinctive thing about the lawn furniture one night that it was moved out of place was that it had a crisscross stack of little limbs, and I took photos of that. They were just stacked in this. It was like child play to me. It was just stacked in this chair, but the chair was scooted back a little ways, like something had actually stood there and caused the movement of the chair to be moved back. I had two chairs sitting side by side. This chair had been moved, and there was the stack of wood. So I thought, well, I'm going to leave that stack of wood in that chair. And there were actually limbs that were. I had a cherry tree over this chair, and it had actually broken these limbs from that cherry tree. But the distinctive thing about the ends of the broken tree limbs were that they seemed to be twisted. You could see that something had twisted. It wasn't a clean break. It was a twist. You could see it on the ends of some of the limbs that were in the chair. I left that little pile of wood there. And a few days later, I went back out to look to see it. I was looking every day to see if there was any changes or if it was torn up or if it's thrown away or if anything had been bothered with it. And actually, there were two more little limbs added on it, on that stack. I wish I'd left it longer, but somebody advised me, said, "Well, ditch it over the hill and see if they'll rebuild, something will rebuild the nest there or the stack there." which I took the advice. But now, had I to do it ever again, I would have left it to see if any more wood would have been added to that little pile. But I took photos of that, and I thought that was kind of distinctive looking. And whatever had broken the limbs had broken it from the cherry tree. I've had my cellar door opened. A human or something with hands had to take the lock off the cellar door. I don't lock it. I just put the lock into the hasp of the lock and don't close it. So it's easy for me to get it on and off. So someone or something had opened taken the lock off and then laid the lock on a table that I have right there, and the door was actually swung open and left open. So something with hands had to lift the lock off and then lay it on the table. So if it was not a Sasquatch or Bigfoot, it had to be a human. That's the only two options. And I was here by myself my mom was here at the time. That was it. I've had trellises. I had a wooden trellis over my walkway in the front. And this happened years and years ago when my children were still here. I got up one morning and I looked out. My trellis was gone. I had climbing roses that grew up over this trellis. And so I go outside to look closer, see what all that trellis had been ripped up with such force that the rose itself was ripped out of the ground, and the trellis had been pitched over into the driveway. And there had not been a storm. There hadn't been any kind of activity like that you could blame it on that. I had another metal trellis at the other side of my house. That's on the end where whatever jumped off my roof that night jumped on what I call the pebble patio. I had a metal trellis there. Well, it got weak with time and erosion and all that, but invariably that trellis would be moved over, and I would pull it back in place. That went on for some time. Then it would be crushed down from the top. I had ivy growing all over that trellis, and it actually got crushed down at the top. And this winter, it was finally just gone, and I had to get rid of the trellis. But I'd tell my brother, something bothered my trellis again. Something moved my trellis.
Yeah, especially the one with the roses, because I used to have a trellis too, and once you start getting what's that? There's a plant. Oh, it's irrelevant. But anyway, I remember I had it's kind of like vines growing in between the trellis. Mm-hmm. And once you start that process, especially like rose bushes or whatever, it's almost impossible to get that trellis down unless you almost have to dig out, go out with the chainsaw and, cut down the rose, not chainsaw, but you have to cut down the rose bushes and dig them out and actually cut them out. And it's a huge process taking one of those down once you've had something like roses or something grow through them. So for it to just be ripped off and thrown.
That was the amazing thing. It actually looked like something or someone had just grabbed that trellis, jerked it out of the ground, and pitched it like in a fit. Like if you were trying to break something up into several pieces, this was in several pieces, and the rose was uprooted totally. It just ruined the whole thing. I mean, the rose was damaged to the point I couldn't reset it or anything. So that always amazed me. And also when my kids were here, we had an above-ground pool. Because of our isolation, it kept our children occupied in the summertime. They swam every day practically in the pool. Well, the pool was at the end of the pebble patio in that area. There was like the pebble patio, there was the yard, and then there was the pool. So my picture window in the dining room that I spoke of earlier, I could look out, watch the kids as they got older swim, and we had the neighbor children, which were mostly my nieces, nephews, swim with them at times, things like that. Well, I got up one morning, and I came to that picture window just looking out at the pool, and I could see the pool water was gone. The level of it, I couldn't even see the water. So I go out to the pool, and there was a deck built up for the children to get on and then get in the pool. And it was a large oval pool. the reason the water was gone was because the pool lining was shredded. Well, my thoughts were a bear had possibly, or something else. It was something large by the shredding. It looked like claw marks. And I believe it was August when this happened. It was hot. I thought, well, a bear has gotten in that pool maybe for water, because our creeks have a tendency here to dry up and only have water in certain places. And I thought, well, there's been a bear came here and possibly got in that pool or fell in that pool. But whatever shredded it had shredded the pool lining in trying to get out. That was obvious. And it wasn't a human that had done it, because the ladder down in the pool was, to one side, and this had happened pretty much center of the pool. So I always, after I started putting together that possibly there were Bigfoot in my neighborhood, I thought, is that possible? I'll never know, but that's a possibility. A lot of things take place. I try to be reasonable about it. I think I have a logical mind. I don't want to ascribe everything I hear to Sasquatch or Bigfoot activity, but there's been too many things that have happened. My dad used to grow beautiful vegetable gardens. He's passed away. But I remember one summer when my children were little, they had a corn patch that was ready to harvest, and Mom had planned on canning the corn. Well, my dad went out that morning to get his corn. All the ripe corn was gone. It was gone. It had happened during the night. Another time, he had tomatoes in his garden, and they were ripe, beautiful tomatoes. They were getting ready to can those too. He went out to harvest the tomatoes. Every one of them, except the green ones, were gone. And he always thought somebody had stolen his food, and that was the description he told us kids, somebody stole my tomatoes last night. Somebody stole my corn last night. Well, now I look back on that and I think, well, maybe not. Maybe not.
Yeah, no kidding. Who would come and take all of the tomatoes, or who would come and take all of the corn?
And in the nighttime, knowing the man had guns in the house, knowing that he had dogs, around, I just can't really think that would be a human. And also, to gather that much corn, you have to get it out. You can't carry that much corn out. So, my mom and dad would have been aware of a vehicle coming into their property there, I would think. So.
Yeah, and that's pretty ballsy if you're going to come in and just take a man's corn, or you come in and take it, because like you said, out in the country, and it doesn't matter what part of the country you're in, but it could be Washington, Oregon, West Virginia, Texas. You step foot on a man's property and you start taking stuff in the middle of the night, you just might get shot.
Exactly. All my neighbors have guns, and most of them are hunters. My neighbors have had their experiences. My uncle lives across the way from me. His brother, I didn't learn this until this past few months, but his brother, and this man has been dead probably 20 years or more, but my neighbor's nieces had told me that their uncle had vowed and declared, even when he was there that many years ago, there were Bigfoot in this hollow. He was convinced of that. Well, I never knew that, never heard of that. I wish I had have known of it, and maybe could have talked to him, but like I said, Bigfoot wasn't on my radar until about 10 years ago, so I didn't have that opportunity to know that. But my cousin lives on above her father there. They have had their house hit, and she said actually the house was hit so hard one night when they went out and checked the next morning, the foundation is cracked. She said they feel that whatever hit their house that hard actually cracked their foundation.
Yeah, I believe it. I've always said that these creatures, I think they could tip a car over, no problem. So cracking the foundation of a house, hitting a house so hard, especially out there in West Virginia, I don't know what other animal is large enough out there to cause that kind of damage.
My grandmother, as I told you earlier, used to regale us grandchildren. That was our entertainment. When we went to my grandmother and grandfather's house when I was little, and I'm 65 years old, so as a child, I remember growing up, my grandmother would, whatever grandchildren were present, we gathered around her favorite chair where she sat, and she would tell us things that happened to her or experiences of her neighbors and things. We always referred to them as, Ma, tell us a story. Well, Ma was an excellent storyteller, but she used to tell us a story that she said she knew the people, she knew of the people, and she knew of the account of when this happened when she was a little girl. And she said that this man, his name escapes me right now, she used to call him by name, and she said he was a big boy of maybe 17 or 18 years old. And he had a bull, I think it was a bull, that plowed. Well, he couldn't get the bull to do what he wanted it to do. I think it was a bull. I don't think it was a mule. But anyway, she said he was beating that poor bull crazy. I mean, he was just beating it. And she said that this big hairy thing came out of the woods and scooped up this boy, carrying him off, and the mother grabbed up a piece of firewood or stove wood, and she tried to hit the creature to let her boy loose. It would not. It went off into the woods with her boy, and her boy told his mother and the neighbors after it happened, his name was Bill Spry. That's what Grandma used to say. She'd say, Grandma told us things sometimes as object lessons in being honest or being careful or treating your animals well and things like that. But this story was reputedly true. She said the thing was covered with hair and had red eyes. And she said it picked up Bill Spry, took him in the woods, dropped him, deposited him into a large briar patch of some sort. Said Bill, like to never got out of that briar patch. And when he did, he finally made it back home. He was just cut all to pieces from those briars. And she said Bill never beat his animal like that again. So she always told that as being a truthful story.
Yeah, that's interesting, especially the description. And
my own cousin in property that we own right now, and the people who tend that property and have a house there now, this is hereditary property. He said that he shot at a Bigfoot one night. The interesting thing about this Bigfoot was that it would stand on the hillside, and this was long after they'd already sold their cow, and it would moo like a cow. And he said it sounded just like a cow. But he eventually shot at it because it was down around the barn area, and he said that thing took off, crossed the creek, and went straight up a rock cliff. He said no human could go up that rock cliff like that. And he said it was yelling and screaming the whole time it did it. But this happened maybe 5 years ago. But when I was a little girl of about 6, I would say, I had an older cousin. He was the oldest one of my grandparents' grandchildren, actually. And his name was James. James came by my grandparents' house one morning, and we were all on the front porch, so I know it was summertime by that. And he began to tell us what had happened to him the night before. So we always called our grandparents Ma and Pa. So he said, Ma, let me tell you what happened. He said, last night I was down at the church house, which was just not a very long walk from my grandparents' house. Most everybody walked then, but they didn't have vehicles. Not a lot of people had vehicles up there at that time. And so we're talking 1955, around that era. And he said, down there at the church house, he said, under the swinging bridge, he said he and his friend were gigging frogs in a canoe. They had 2 boat paddles, and they were gigging frogs from the canoe. And he said, Ma, he said, something with red glowing eyes came up out of that creek. And he said, it almost got us. He said, I actually broke my boat oar over its head trying to get away from that thing. And he said it had hair all over it, and it had bright red eyes. And he said he was still scared the next morning. That tells me that if people are still seeing these creatures in the home area where I grew up and my family grew up, and I think they're here in my vicinity. That tells me that they've been around a long time.
Yeah, it's interesting. Even behaviors and descriptions don't change over time, over a long period of time. They generally stay the same. And I can't thank you enough for coming on the show and sharing your own personal encounters, but also stuff that's happened with your family. And be safe while you're out there.
Well, it ruins me, honestly. The research and what happened to me personally with the roof and objects being moved and things being left for me. I didn't even tell you one time a yellow canary was in the middle of my doormat on my screened-in porch one morning when I got up. It was just beautiful. I rarely see these little yellow birds in my area. And its wings were folded down by its side, and it had the appearance to me of being carried. It didn't die naturally that way, and die in the dead center of my welcome mat, But I don't know any other explanation unless there's. I can't even imagine why humans would be out in the woods at 3 and 4 o'clock in the morning, yelling and making sounds and beating on trees, and for what purpose would they walk into an isolated area and do that? That's the only explanation I have.
Yeah. Well,
that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. And as you said, be safe. Yes, it ruined me. I would never camp with a tent. I have no desire to go in the woods camping. Unless I would have a good, solid camper. It just made me think differently. I worry about my grandchildren when they camp. Yeah, it ruins you, really. It really does.
Yeah, I hate to admit it, but it does.
Yes, you just never feel safe like you had in the woods. I mean, I used to walk my roads for exercise. I used to never think about anything, and now I won't even do that. There's no way, because especially at first, before the 411 books and all that, I didn't know they might eat humans. But logically speaking, a bear will eat a human. Any wild animal, big cats, will consume a human. And naturally, these are wild beasts. Of course, there's the possibility are that they're going to eat humans too. And so I don't want to be food for one of them. I do know that. It has ruined me. It has. I
don't blame you. Well, thank you, Sid. Thank you for coming on. I really do appreciate it.
Well, you're most welcome, Wes. As I said, this has been armchair information that I've accumulated over many years, and I'm telling the truth about what I've experienced, and these experiences keep accumulating, it seems.
Yeah.
So it's been my pleasure. Thank you for calling.
Oh, thank you, Sydney. And thank you for sharing all the stories with your own personal encounters, but also your families. I wanted to let the audience know out there, to the members out there, I'm going to be in Texas on the 15th. Like I said, we're going to be shooting a trailer for a couple networks and trying to transition the podcast. The podcast isn't going to go away, but transition some of the shows into a video format so that kind of change the way TV looks at this, have real people on telling real encounters. When I'm down in Texas, it's kind of up in the air right now. I'd really like to go out for a few nights with some of the members out there in Texas, but with all the flooding and everything else going on, I was talking to Tim Sermons today. Everything seems to be underwater at this point. I'm hoping within 15 days it won't be, but we'll have to play it by ear as we get out there. But I'd love to see you while I'm down there. And again, if you'd like to meet up while I'm down there, shoot me an email, wes@sasquatchchronicles.com. If you've had an encounter, email me, wes@sasquatchchronicles.com. Thanks so much, everyone, for listening tonight. I really appreciate it. And I will see you back here on Sunday. Have a great night, everyone.